You can use theirs to do it rather than have it your own.
Is that the same?
That's a good ringtone there, Bob.
I was like, that's very snappy.
Jazzy.
I know.
Alicia's that you?
She's like, I'm not that snappy.
That's Bob?
Yeah, it's Robert. He's with it.
Bob, you have to dance to that music.
Maybe it was on me.
You have to dance. Do you know how to change your password on the phone? On the city phone, the Samsung?
Isn't it the same as the computer?
Maybe.
It all hits the same server. It's going to be the same as whatever your login is for that.
Did Rachel tell you she's not? She told me. Okay.
I got that. She didn't tell me.
I'm glad I got that call. It reminded me to turn off my phone.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'll call to order the regular work session for the Sierra Vista City Council of April 12, 2018. Ms. Gray called and said she would not be here today. And we'll move on to the first item, which is the meeting agenda for, excuse me, I said 12 April. 10 April is the meeting date today. And we're going to talk about the council agenda for 12 April. And obviously, we're going to have the prayer and pledge as usual. We've got acceptance of the agenda. We have a proclamation for Second Chance Month. I'm also going to be reading a proclamation on, we got to get it right here, Days of Remembrance observance based on something that went on the Post on Monday. And then we have a distinguished budget award and a fair housing proclamation as well. Then we go to city manager's report, and then we start with new business. In new business, the first item or item number 2 is actually the text and code amendment for Chapter 90 animals, domestic fowl. Mr. Pregler, do you want to give us your staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Mueller and members of council. This would be a request for final adoption of code amendments to Article 90, which is animals, and specifically amendments to domestic fowl. And before I get into the specifics of the amendments, I want to kind of give a brief history about domestic fowl and backyard chickens. The Development Code adoption in 1986 referenced the raising of chickens as an accessory use only in the urban ranch zoning district. In 2011, the staff was receiving a number of comments from the public regarding the allowance of fowl in backyards, chickens specifically in the backyards and residential zoning districts. As a result, staff went to go talk to the city attorney asking for a legal interpretation whether chickens were allowed in residential zoning districts. In 2011, he opined that raising the chickens were only permitted in an urban ranch because the use itself is only referenced in the urban ranch zoning district. Therefore, it is prohibited in all the other zoning districts. In 2016, as you recall, the City Council made an amendment to the Development Code and created the Land Use Matrix and Agricultural Animal Definition, which defined chickens as an agricultural animal allowed as an accessory use in urban ranch, which reinforced the previous city attorney's opinion. Now, in 2017, the city was approached by members of the public to amend the city code to allow domestic fowl in residential zoning districts. December 12th, 2017, City Council work session, staff was given direction to proceed with these code amendments and work with the proponents on creating some language. The P&Z Commission held 2 public hearings on the amendments, January 16th and February 6th. The P&Z recommended approval with a vote of 3-2 with additional recommendations, and I have there in blue here that council actually revised or removed many of the recommendations from the Planning and Zoning Commission. And on February 22nd, 2018, City Council did declare a 30-day public comment period. So the language you have in Exhibit A before you today and the language that was posted for public comment actually reflects the comments addressed and amendments made at that February 22nd meeting. So let's first go talk about the definition of domestic fowl. As I mentioned, that the definition of chicken will be removed from agricultural animals in the development code and relocated into domestic fowl definition, which is in chapter 90 in the city code. And the definition of domestic fowl therefore reads, domestic fowl shall be defined as being limited to ducks and female chickens. Location requirements. Fowl shall be limited to properties that include single-family residential detached dwellings. And secondly, a henhouse, coop, run shall be located no closer than 5 feet from a property line or 20 feet from a residence on an adjacent property. Now, talk about the quantity of chickens. No more than 1 domesticated fowl per 1,000 square feet of total lot area, up to a maximum of 8 domestic fowl, may be kept on an eligible property. And secondly, and this reflects the change that was discussed at the meeting on February 22nd, the Community Development Director may authorize 1 additional domestic fowl per 2,000 square feet of lot area above 8,000 square feet, subject to the following conditions being met. 1, that the applicant provides written documentation attesting no objection to the requested increase in domesticated fowl from all abutting property owners in a manner deemed to be acceptable by the city. And this would typically would require staff to provide the applicant either a petition form or application form. It would be the responsibility of the homeowner to receive these written confirmations from the neighboring property owners. And secondly, that the minimum required setback distance of a henhouse, coop, or run from a residence on an abutting property shall increase by 5 feet for each domesticated fowl being requested. So what I did is I broke these down into some tables to kind of better explain what we're referring to. So the table in front of you goes by lot size, and if you recall, but the language states that you have a maximum of 8 fowl total on the property. However, there would be an administrative review and neighbor approval if you want to have additional fowl on the property. So above 8,000 square feet, the ratio goes from 1,000 to 2,000 square feet. So, for example, for 10,000 square feet, you can have 1 additional fowl, would be 9 total chickens. 12,000 square feet, you'll have a total of 10 total chickens on the property. 18,000 square feet would be 13, and then 36,000 would give you a total of 22 total fowl on the property. And the way this is calculated is everybody gets 8 fowl total, and then you add additional fowl per every 2,000 square feet of additional square foot property. And then the second table talks about number of fowl and the setback requirement. As I stated previously, 20 foot from adjoining residence is the maximum. However, you have to go an additional 5 feet for every additional fowl. So if you have 9 fowl, it'd be 25 feet, and of course down 22, it'd be a total of 90 foot setback to an adjacent residence.
What's additional fowl mean? Or neighborhood fowl?
Neighborhood, you mean neighborhood approval?
Neighborhood approval.
Okay,
Is
again,
that on either side or
right,
behind and-
that's
and
correct.
front of?
All the adjoining property owners.
Okay.
Correct. Okay, some of the other provisions in the amendments. Yes.
Go on, excuse me for interrupting you. The last time we talked, you had a calculation on the average number of square feet for property in the city. Do you recall that?
I think what you're referring to is number of lots based on square footage, right? So there's like a certain amount of lots that were 10,000 square feet. I don't have that list in front of me, but I do recall that.
Okay, I was just going to ask what was about the average lot size?
My
in the
memory
city?
serves, I think 2/3 of the lots are 8,000 square feet or less.
Correct.
8,000 or less.
Actually, it might be 3/4, as high as 3/4.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. That
Yeah.
covers it.
Yeah. Okay, and some of the other additional amendments that are being proposed to look at noise and odors. Roosters will be prohibited. The property maintained so that odors related to the domestic fowl are not detectable at the property boundaries, and the sale of eggs or other products derived from the fowl is prohibited on the property. Containment. Fowl shall be kept in a secure henhouse coop run during non-daylight hours and when unsupervised. The yard area must be enclosed with opaque fencing that is adequate to contain the fowl on the property. And 3, the size of the henhouse coop run shall not be less than 4 square feet per fowl. Living conditions. Henhouses coops run shall be impermeable to rodents, birds, and predators and designed to prevent the harboring of animals underneath the structures. Second, henhouses coops run shall be kept in a neat condition, including clean and dry bedding and regular removal of waste materials. Thirdly, feed or other items likely to attract rodents shall be kept in secure, protected containers, except a constant water supply shall be required. All right, looking at public comments, at the P&Z meeting, there were 4 citizens that spoke in favor in the January 16th meeting. 2 citizens spoke in favor on the February 6th meeting. The city did receive a number of written public comments prior to the 30-day public comment period, both in favor and in opposition. And there were about 50 letters in support with a petition of over 200 plus signatures and 35 in opposition. And those in opposition stated that there'd be a decrease in property values, noise, odors. It would increase predators and rodents, and there's a philosophy that fowl are rural and agricultural animals. The city received a number of written public comments following the February 22nd meeting, both in favor and in opposition. As of this writing, there were 75 letters in support, with again a revised petition with 200 plus signatures, and 71 in opposition, again with the same reasons as stated earlier. I do want to point out that the city manager does recommend denial of this request, and I believe that does conclude staff's report.
Questions for Mr. Pregler? Yes, sir.
Mr. Pregler, can you go back to the first slide, please?
Sure.
Okay. You and I know because we were downstairs and we were kind of going through as far back as we can to see where the changes were to city code.
Correct.
So the memo dated 10/20/2011 from the city attorney that opined that the raising of chickens only be permitted to urban ranches. I've looked at the memo. It is my opinion, and I'll back that opinion up here with hopefully some legal facts, that I think that his opinion was wrong. It contradicts itself, and it doesn't even really follow legal common sense, as it were. So, for example, for the record, since I don't think the public's seen this, there was a discussion that took place in 2011 about chickens, as you stated. 2 days prior to that, there was a council inquiry about the draft language that would be going into the code. One of those definitions that was included in that draft was poultry, any domesticated bird, including but not limited to chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, guineas, ratties, pigeons. The raising of marketing of poultry shall only be allowed within the urban ranch zoning district. That definition wasn't included, for whatever reason, in any further code. So it never made it past draft. Council never voted on it. So it was something that was going to be discussed. So the first point that I would make is, in order for something to be enforced, it has to be defined and there has to be a set of standards. We learned that when we went through the bicycle rack situation. So in this case, if the definition doesn't exist and the definition for poultry doesn't exist in the current code, and it really didn't exist back then either, we'd had a definition for livestock and we added the definition for agricultural animals, that somewhere at least there was a discussion within city staff to add that definition into the code prior to the memo going out. So the memo that goes out on October 20th, 2011, from the then city attorney says, in reply to your recent request, this was to you, Mr. Pregler, for the opinion regarding the above matter, please be advised of the following. From my review of the development codes, it appears to me that the only zone within which chickens would be allowed is urban ranch, section 151.22.0082 Delta. It addresses the issue of raising and marketing poultry. That's important. I'll come back to that in a second. I have been unable to locate any reference to poultry being permitted in any other zones. That's the second point. I'll come back to that in a second. This being the case, the doctrine of inclusio unus est exclusio alturis would, as you were well aware, apply. Now that's Latin, and the Latin term for that is when one or more things of a class is mentioned, then others of the same class are excluded. Coincidentally, researching a legal book, the example that they give is if I have a ball field and the ball field has a sign on it that says no dogs allowed, which I think our ball fields have that. If I applied that reference to that ball field, then that would mean dogs are not allowed and everything else is excluded from that provision. Hence, I can bring my tiger, my crocodile, my panther, etc., onto the ball field. So then it contradicts itself and it says again, as a result, it is in my opinion that the chickens would only be allowed in the urban ranch. But if we go back to the root of that term, the legal root, it would mean that chickens are allowed to be raised and sold in urban ranches, and then all other prohibitations of chickens would be excluded anywhere else. So that's the first point with his memo that I think is false. But I'll set that aside. And let's go back to the original code. The original code says that in urban and ranching, chickens can be raised and sold. They go together. 30-something years ago, presumably when this code first came in, it would make sense in a rural area that if I had a neighbor who was raising and selling chickens, that he could sell them to somebody, and presumably that would be their neighbors. I don't think that they're going to take them up to Tucson. I don't think they're going to take them down to Douglas. So in that case, if it's not prohibited in the single-family dwelling portions of the code, which it's not mentioned as by the attorney's own memo, then it falls to constitutional law to some extent, and I hate to go that route, but the basis of our freedom in society is that which is not prohibited is free to us. So for the city attorney to simply put out a memo and ask in council to acquiesce any decisions in actually changing the code without there being any code to enforce, I believe that the city attorney was completely wrong in his opinion of the city code, since we cannot read into code that doesn't exist. So all this first part here that just showed up today, I think is pointless. I think the thing that we have to do, Mr. Mayor, is when we start to now decide what we're going to do is rectify potentially a bad opinion by a city attorney and now figure out if we're going to allow this to be legal or not.
And I would tend to agree with you. The points you just made are not germane because, go up to the next one. Did we not, maybe it was on the last one.
This one?
Did we not at one point agree as a city council that the only in code that said that changed the code to its current status that we're looking to change? Didn't we vote on that said to prohibit it for chickens? I think what we're looking for today is not to dig up the past, but it's to look at the future. So I'm not sure, your points may be valid.
Mr. Mayor,
I'm not sure they're germane to our discussion today.
Mr. Mayor, I'm just going what was briefed to council. I don't believe that what was briefed to council is correct. I believe that's germane. If that's being thrown out there, it's for a reason. I think the history lesson is wrong, and that's what's brought us to this point today.
So, what would you like to see happen now?
I think that we're going to move forward with the code as it's written.
The thing is, it says right here in 2016, the code defined chickens as an agricultural animal allowed as an accessory use in urban ranch.
Correct.
And that's the point where we need to start. We can argue and debate history and whether or not the attorney made the right decision or not. That's fine. You can do that all you want. But for today, we're starting with the current code and changes to the current code. Any other issues that we need to discuss with this? Okay, I'm gonna bring something up that I plan to propose an amendment. Right now, as much as I would like to, I can't support the change to the code. And there is one way I think I can do that. I've been wrestling this for quite a while, and actually what got me thinking about it was something the proponents said, and that is the individuals feel that they should have the right to do with their property whatever they want to do. And the problem I have with that is when you live in a municipality or a city, there's a social contract, and I'll go back to a simple thing like, if you're living in an apartment, obviously you don't play your music from 1 to 3 in the morning because your neighbors are probably going to work. That's a compromise that you make. But again, it may be your house or your apartment that you're living in. So I think a way I can get to the point where I would vote for this is to propose the following amendment. If you go to subparagraph 90-11, that's the standards on domesticated fowl. Part A basically says the keeping of domestic fowl for non-commercial purposes is allowed under the following conditions. And I would amend paragraph A. Currently reads, keeping of domestic fowl shall be allowed on the detached single-family residential property. The amendment I would make was I put a comma there, and I would say, when the applicant provides written documentation attesting to no objection of the requested fowl from all abutting property owners in a manner determined to be acceptable by the city. And essentially, that's the same process when we talked about the application for additional chickens. So that would be amendment I will be proposing for discussion on Thursday, and I wanted to throw that out so you're aware that's where I am.
Can we discuss that now, Mr. Mayor?
Well, it's up to you.
So, Mr. Mayor, I think one of the things that continues to get us in trouble is a council, and I believe my comments with the city attorney's memo are germane to this point. We cannot acquiesce ourselves from a decision as leaders, as elected leaders. I don't want to put it off on the neighbors to have to be pit against each other in order to determine whether somebody can own property on their property. So we need to make a decision, and if it goes south, then, oh well, then we will face it at the election.
Understand. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
I agree with that. I think we can make that decision as a council, pro or con, without, I like the way you put that, without pitting the neighbors against each other. I think it's a good effort at a compromise, Mr. Mayor, but I don't think it's necessary.
And I don't necessarily see this as pitting the neighbors against each other. I would prefer they go and talk to one another before they actually start the process of having fowl on the property.
I think it's a good
I
point.
think that's a good neighbor thing to do, in my
Sure,
mind.
to talk to each other, but to ask for permission from your neighbors doesn't seem to
Well,
be.
what you're asking for is that they don't object to the thing. Yes, sir.
What you're asking council to do is to legislate and put in law that somebody has to go get permission from their neighbors. And I don't think that that
And
is appropriate.
essentially, that's what we're doing with the other part of it, though, as well.
But I think the difference with the other part is that you're asking for more than what we have as a council agreed is acceptable. So when you ask for more, I feel like that's okay, because then we're being able to deal with people who have land lots that are larger than the 8,000.
Well, I understand I'm changing the acceptable standard by the motion. I understand that completely. The motion's acceptable to council, I should say. Bob?
I agree. I think if the neighbor concurred that the person could have a chicken there, that's perfectly fine. I mean, making that a prerogative is not a bad thing, I don't think.
I have a question.
Sure.
Should we also put in city code for the noise ordinance that we have to ask our neighbors for permission to buy a loud car? Where does it stop?
I don't see the connection there. I'm sorry. So I'll be proposing that amendment on Thursday, and I'm sure we'll have further discussion. So I just want to let you guys know that ahead of time. Anything else on this item? The next item is basically the same, only we're just removing, I forget the phrase, fowls or domesticated fowl or whatever.
Right,
from
we're redefining chickens, we're removing it from the agricultural animal definition and relocating it to a domesticated fowl definition in the city code.
Would that cause just one line elimination of a couple of words in the code?
That's correct.
Okay, is everybody up to speed on that? Any discussion? Okay, thank you, Jeff. We'll now move on to the approval of the city council meeting minutes for March 22nd. Any additions, deletions, corrections, comments? Okay, then we'll move on to the restating of the city's commitment to fair housing. Mr. McLaughlin.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, tomorrow marks the 50-year anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act of 1968 into law. The Fair Housing Act is Title VIII of that law. The act protects the right of every American, regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, disability, and familial status, to obtain the housing of their choice. This resolution affirms the city's commitment to the principle of fair housing and the city's practice of referring aggrieved persons to the Southwest Fair Housing Council, as well as increasing community awareness about fair housing laws by posting information in public places. The reason why this law is so important is that housing plays a major role in defining a person's quality of life and access to opportunity. The city's commitment is memorialized each year by the city's proclaiming April to be Fair Housing Month in Sierra Vista.
That's it. Questions for Mr. McLaughlin? Yes, ma'am.
Normally, somewhere along the way, we just ask if there have been any fair housing complaints within the community. And
Yeah, and I checked on that earlier today, and there haven't been any that our receptionist can recall referring to the Southwest Fair Housing Council. And it's something I asked them to document. So fortunately, in our city, that hasn't been an issue.
And for housing, do we typically use the county's, I can't remember the name of Department of Housing, or do we have an actual housing office within the city?
We do not have a housing office within the city. So when we receive a complaint, we refer the individual to the Southwest Fair Housing Council, who's set up to support these type of complaints.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And if they get a complaint that doesn't come to our receptionist first, do they report back to us? Anything that they get that maybe we don't know about?
Not usually.
Okay. So we'd have to go to them to see if anything is going on.
That's right. And tomorrow, before our meeting on Thursday, I'll consult with them to see if they've worked any cases in our jurisdiction that we may not be aware of.
Okay, thank you.
Over the past year.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on housing? Okay. Then we have an appointment to the Cultural Diversity Commission. Any comments? Other than it was a nice diversity fair this weekend?
I was going to wait to do that till the end. No comments about that. You have the Diversity Commission. I would ask a question. Do we have any commissioners currently?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we do. We're down 5 spots though. So I was up
quorum
there.
yet, yeah.
So now we got one more, but I think we might be close to a quorum with this one.
Okay.
I think, but I'll double check.
Okay.
But we were down by 5 is the last time checked as of this weekend.
Okay, I'll just add at this point then, we had several people express interest.
I was up there at the
at the
fair,
fair.
and we were actively recruiting.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, then we'll move on to that basically takes care of the agenda items. We'll move on to reports, recent trips, and future trips. I'll just basically say I had the privilege of attending a ceremony to honor the Holocaust survivors out on post and provided a proclamation with them. We do have a future meeting coming up. Hopefully, if you're planning to visit with the governor, you saw my email back to the county with a couple of items that we would like to discuss with him. So if you're available on Friday, and I don't remember what the times are, but you got to invite
Late in the afternoon.
For about an hour. I think we've got him. So please consider that if you're available to come and do that and show support for the community. Anybody else on recent trips, meetings, and future meetings? Yes, sir.
Yeah, they had the, obviously, what was just alluded to, we had the Cultural Heritage Festival that took place this year. Thank you very much to city staff for your support in putting that all together. It was a nice turnout. I know Ms. Calhoun was there as well. We said hi very briefly, but it was a lot of stuff going on. There was the Cars for Kids going on this weekend. But the one thing, I just got back in from El Paso. I was out there talking to their Hispanic chamber, and their Hispanic chamber is one of 2 in the country. The other one is in Phoenix, that has a SBA, it's called a minority disadvantaged unit and a woman-owned unit that are subcomponents of the SBA that are housed up in with their localized chambers, and they are just churning out little bitty companies to, their whole purpose is to help stand up little contracting firms and get them going using those SBA advantages. So I brought back all the paperwork. I'm going to turn it over, copies over to Mr. Boone, and then also to both the chambers to see if there's something else there that we can continue to work on. That was something that was very, I told them I was going to be bringing it by a couple months ago, but I hadn't had a chance to get out there. So that's what I have, Mayor.
Thank you. And I forgot to mention that this afternoon I did spend some time with one of the undersecretaries of culture from Mexico and the Consul General about Sonora Fest, which is happening Father's Day weekend, and it appears to be on track. Anything else? Chuck, you wanted to mention something?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Last week I had the opportunity to chair a couple of meetings that are, I know, of importance to the council. The first related to the Southeast Arizona Communications Center, CCOM. We already talked about the governor's visit to the facility on Friday. At that meeting, I think we made significant progress in terms of determining a future budget as well as a potential future funding formula for the various entities to join both the county and city in that endeavor. So that was very productive. We also shortlisted a group of candidates for the executive director position, so that was a very productive meeting. Then on Friday, I attended and chaired the meeting of the Rate Review Advisory Board at the county, and at that meeting, we discussed, well, one good thing was keeping the tipping fee rates the same as they were last year, so we won't see an increase, but of more importance, and of course we discussed this at previous work session, with regards to the rate increase that staff is proposing to the council for inclusion in this year's budget, really was the news that the basically the recycling markets have almost totally collapsed at this point. And that means, for one, paper, which is about a third of our recyclables, is now totally worthless and is actually worth more going to the landfill than it is being recycled. So that was very unfortunate news to hear at that point, which basically leaves the corrugated cardboard, the plastics 1, 2, and 3, as well as aluminum and tin cans being the only viable recyclables for us at this particular point in time. We had a teleconference also here with regards to this discussion with the recycler in Tucson regarding this. And after that discussion, I asked Ms. Flassar to look at schedules for reduced recycling pickups from once a week to maybe twice a month or once a month as a result of these changes. The more we recycle at these particular rates with what we have, the higher it's going to cost. The cost of recycling is actually now, over the last 2 months, gone from where we were able to make some money off of recycling to now where it costs more to recycle than it does to take to the landfill. So those are some very significant issues with the recycling program. As I mentioned at the previous meeting, Sierra Vista is 97% of the county's overall recycling. So we are working with the county staff to develop ways that we can hopefully hold down some of these costs in the future. So that was a pretty significant thing. Also at that meeting, we discussed the future of the Cochise County Tourism Council in a separate item of discussion. I think it was the consensus of the group that we move more towards economic development and tourism together, bringing more people to the table and the ability for all the entities to discuss the various economic development opportunities in the county. So we're looking at changing the makeup of that group and broadening the focus of it. And that's all I have with regards to those two
Questions for Mr. Patucci?
Just a comment, Mr. Patucci. I would like to, in regards to recycling, have some way of communicating with the public about the depth of the issues. And I don't know if you plan a newspaper article or something, but I think because it's been such an important part of the community, at least for some people, for a long time, that we should do something in a way of communicating with the public about this depth of the issue.
Well, I believe the first step, Ms. Calhoun, and I agree with you that we do need to do that, and we do need to do that very quickly. I want to get, and Victoria discussed this with me this morning, we would rather have more of a full-blown work session with the council here within the next couple of weeks. Hopefully Sharon will come back with her recommendations, and the options range from, well, we continue to recycle, only that will be reflected in higher refuse rates, down to trying to narrow down the scope of recycling and trying to hold down the cost, and whatever's in between those two. So I think we need to go over those options with you in a public meeting.
Sure.
And try to draw some attention to it, and then roll out some sort of a public information program with that.
Okay. I hope what I'd like to see too is the background for the total collapse. You know, if there's any information out there that we don't research right there on Google, you know, to find out what was
Well, Mr.
precipitated.
Haverty, the county solid waste director who attended the EAC meeting with me last month when we went over some of these issues with them, I think would be happy to come and explain, you know, what's going on with the recycling market in general.
Yeah, I heard that was a really thorough presentation, and it just seemed like one beyond the EAC should hear that kind of presentation.
Well, we should certainly plan to do that with
That's
you.
great.
So this is the second time I brought it up here in public with you, and we probably should have more of a focus on it at the next time we discuss it.
Thank you.
Duchek, anything else on reports, trips, future meetings? Yes, sir.
As it pertains, when do you expect to have for council to have the discussion on recycling?
I would hope by your next work session.
Can we also include alternatives, the alternatives and the cost of alternatives for potentially looking at another landfill site, Huachuca City, somebody like that, as opposed to
Well, I have been approached by Huachuca City, and part of the issue, well, there's two really major issues. Without us, one, the county system would collapse since we have most of the garbage. Second is the Huachuca City fill is a grandfathered site that doesn't offer all of the environmental protections that the current site does, and I would have to check with our attorney and some others about the liability of the city then dumping back into an unlined landfill at that point.
Sure, but we can get at least the alternatives of what is out there. Okay. And then another thing, as far as I guess I'm still confused. The last time we talked about it, we were running what was reported was last year we were running a $20,000 give or take surplus in terms of $20,000 in proceeds from the recycling or the enterprise fund for refuse, correct? And then we're down $770,000 is what we're.
Well, that's a
correct?
combination of factors, one of which is recycling.
I know it's not about recycling, but in refuse, with the enterprise fund in general, that's what it was.
The factors to include recycling, we were recycling at the county for $0 a ton, which is certainly a good deal compared to $64 a ton that trash was going in. The county would then take the recyclables and market them to the reseller in Tucson, and they were actually making in the hundreds of thousands of dollars on recycling, which was a revenue to the system. When that started going down, there was still money being made, but about 2 to 3 months ago, we got word that now the cost of the recyclables had gone from $0 per ton to $33 per ton, and then just recently we got news that they actually exceeded the tipping fee. So this has happened very quickly with regards to what's happening, and it really is something that pertains to Sierra Vista only with regards to the system. The other factors, the legislature, of course, a few years ago changed the policies with regards to commercial hauling. Commercial hauling was a major source of revenue for us. Once they allowed the private haulers in to start encroaching on our commercial business, we started losing revenue as a result of that. And that's been kind of a steadier process here going forward. Of course, it's pretty easy to undercut us. If you know what our rates are, you can just cut a deal for less. So we're seeing a loss of revenue there. Of course, we're not seeing any growth in terms of refuse amounts generated either. Some people would call that a good thing, but as I've said many times, refuse is a funny business. The more you have, the more money you make. And we've done a good job with recycling. We've done we have not had the population growth or construction growth to generate construction refuse, and as a result, we're not generating as much revenue for the overall system.
I got a bunch of other questions, but I'll wait for the work session.
Yeah, well, it's a funny business and very complex.
Okay, anything else on trips recently? Okay.
Sorry.
Future meetings, past meetings.
Past meeting. I attended the Carmichael Neighborhood Association meeting, and that's really become quite an organization of folks who care about the northwest end of town and who are taking things into their own hands. I'd like to give a shout out to Bryant Sayers, who's a member of that Carmichael Neighborhood Association, who's done such a fantastic job in pulling together cleanup activities in the community. And one of the things I want to mention in public is the collaboration between the Captain's Program at Fort Huachuca and the Carmichael Neighborhood Association's cleanup efforts, and how Bryant has organized, along with Jessica, with the Community Development Department, to do cleanups not just on the West End, but all over town. And it's been a successful effort. I think he said 40 guys come out once a week or so, and they do a major cleaning up in some portion of the community. And it's really been a good thing for the community. And I think that's all for Carmichael Neighborhood, just that we meet regularly, and it's a positive activity in the community.
Okay, are we ready to move on to board and commission liaison updates? We had a couple of those already, but anybody? Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I would just like to inform everyone that the Youth Commission is planning to be present at the meeting on Thursday, so stay civil.
Well, do we have to? Okay, that's great. For a particular reason?
They are trying to get more involved in local government and the actual process. So they had previously been watching meetings online and then coming to Youth Commission and talking about them. And now I think they're going to try to actually attend some more of the meetings.
That's great. Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I think did we move on from future meeting requests?
We're not there yet.
Okay, good.
We're done. Board and commission
Not in the
liaison
future
updates.
yet? All right. So
Board and commission updates.
Actually, all of my commissions have briefed us, with the exception of cultural diversity, which doesn't have a quorum. But I just want to reiterate their pieces. I know, obviously, the Airport Commission came up and briefed shortly after we had our meeting this month. I would ask the staff to help figure out and consider how to find one or two things on the list of requests that they had to consider, try to find some funding. Like I said, I came in this morning from Fort Bliss. The airport sign is kind of small and tiny. It's easy to miss, and there's probably a lot of opportunity for that. And then the same thing with arts and humanities, and when we get to the future discussion, I'll talk more about that. But some asks that the commissions are bringing up, is there something that's there? And I guess the next point is, if the commissions are requesting things, as you're going through that, if there's things that other people or there's things that staff are considering, to let council know the priority and how you came to the priority for that funding. So, for example, we're not going to take commission input because of funding, but here's some of the other stuff that we are, just how that decision was made and how it was weighed out is just something that I think would be interesting that I can take back to them.
And that should be part of the budget discussions that are upcoming. Yep.
And
Yes.
one of the
Yes,
things
ma'am.
we had asked during those presentations was a list of all of the recommendations that all of the different commissions were making for. We'd like to see this. But let me bring this up now before I do my actual report from the different commissions. So we need to be clear about how we bring stuff from the commissions for council decision. I think that's kind of part of what you were talking about. So one of the things that we agreed on when we discussed the commissions was that the commissions would send a request to council, and then we would decide if we felt that was something staff should continue to work on, or that we would ask staff to look into, and then we would make a decision about it. So if they had a project, and they could prioritize the projects that they gave us, and then we can make decisions about that, as Chuck said, part of the budget discussion. But I'm not sure that, and this needs clarification, that the commissions would actually ask staff to do something before we actually decide if that's a project that we want to
There's a number of ways. You described one way, and basically you follow what Craig has already said, is that if it's a big project, obviously it's going to have budget implications, and it's not an emergency type thing, then obviously, well, I'm talking money. It should be on our capital improvements project list, approved by, recommended by the commission, et cetera, and that worked through staff. There are other things that may be smaller in nature, like correcting the rules that are on. Maybe there's an old sign with the park rules that are hanging in the park. That's the kind of thing that should be brought up through the liaison, basically, without the council getting involved and say, this is a routine thing. We need to get the parks people, or we need to get whoever is responsible for that particular item and make the correction. So there's a number of ways that the commissions can work to get things done. Big projects, small projects. And as liaison, we don't normally have to bring everything to the council for complete discussion. If it seems like it's a routine or it should be a standard operating procedure type of thing, that can be corrected. Now, obviously, if there's funding involved, or it involves a change in policy, then those things need to come to the council for discussion.
So does that mean that all of the suggestions that were made by various commissions and will be made, I think there's still a few more that we need to hear, they'll automatically, if they're of a costly nature, they will automatically go into the...
Well, I would suggest to you that we'll use the arts and humanities. They had the black box theater, and they had the
awnings.
The awnings, and those are two big items. We know that's going to cost money. If the council agrees that those need to go on to the list after discussion, then they need to be on the list for spending. And then they need to be go through the budget process to prioritize them against all the other things that's being asked for.
Okay.
So that's the example of the big project. To me, that's a big project, not a routine SOP
Like signs.
type thing, like the signs, or there may be other.
Okay, let me make what if the signs were, and this hasn't come up yet, but it should. What if the signs had to do with, for instance, the annexing of once whatever part of Fry gets annexed, or all of Fry, and some special signage is suggested to commemorate the area that is Fry.
Yeah.
Is that considered?
To me, that would be almost an in-house project. Obviously, there's going to be some money associated with that. But in fact, if we want to put the little west side signs or whatever above the street signs at key locations, then that's something that the liaison would come up and recommend it to the city.
Okay.
And I'm sure they would come back and ask us if we had any objections to that. But again, I don't see that as a large amount of money to do something like that, even though there will be a cost to it.
Okay, I'm not trying to say we have to have a hand in everything, but clarify what do we have a hand in? What do we need council members to bring to council for some
Policy.
kind of an approval?
Yeah, policy and
Well.
big dollars.
Well, yeah, to your point, I'm sorry, Ms. Calhoun, but no, to the point though, because I had a member of the public gave me a call on my city cell phone, which is, I can probably count on 5 times how many times that's happened. But to her point, and I think this is your point, I feel sometimes that a lot of these budget decisions are kind of being made before they've even come up to us. And I'll give you an example, and somebody can tell me if I'm wrong or not. I'm just going off what the person said. The person called up and said that they pay money to the city. They've done so for years to, I guess, have their dogs out at one of the ball fields to train the dogs. I don't know.
They rent the park essentially.
Yeah, they rent the park. And then they were told by a member of staff that they need to go find somewhere else to do that because the staff is going to, or somebody, the city's going to put in artificial grass and the city doesn't want the dogs on the grass. And it's like, well, that can't be true because we've never had that discussion or had any budgetary decisions on that. And I'm not looking for, I don't know if it's true or not. That's what was said. So I think that before that kind of stuff starts going out, if it's going out, how is the information for the request coming up? How is it getting to us, and how is that information getting put out to council before we've had a chance to vote on it? It's
but again, I think you give a good example. As council people, when we hear that stuff, the first people we should go to are these two, or in this case, it would be the parks lady here, and say, we haven't approved any artificial ball fields, have we?
Well,
and the answer is, or park fields, and the answer is no. And a lot of times when I run these things down, it's complete rumor. Now that may be coming from a individual citizen. It may be coming from a commission member who probably hasn't had a chance to actually sit down and talk to the staff, and that's something they can do too.
Mr. Mayor, in that particular case, just to clear that out, it is true that I've asked Ms. Wilson to look at potential artificial turf proposals for future discussion and inclusion in the budget. But to date,
we're so far, but that's so far in the future.
It's expensive and so far away that no, we're not there. We're not able to.
Yeah, and I'm not so much worried. I'm not so much worried about the staff, planning and working things out. And I don't know if it's true. I just know what the person was said. I guess the question is, at what point does staff start to predict what council's decisions are going to be to the point where if they're telling public things that, hey, public, you need to go find something else. That's all I'm asking is
clearly the employee spoke.
Yeah, the only predictive thing we have in terms of what the council wants is through the strategic plan, which we try to address in the budget. Just so everyone's aware, it is going to be an extremely challenging budget, to say the least. Primarily because of the increase in public safety retirement system costs, over $600,000 this year. Whether or not the increased revenue from state shared revenue and sales tax revenue growth will be enough to overcome that still remains to be seen. But I'm not looking for a lot of room there. And if that's the case, all things being equal, we're pretty much where we are right now.
Okay. For future meetings.
Okay, we're ready to go to future meetings?
Not yet.
You're not ready to go to future meetings?
No.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm going to go fast too, but I want to talk a little bit about.
But you said you had to be out of here by a certain time.
I know, I've got half an hour. I won't use it all. I wanted to talk about West End Commission, and I have environmental affairs. I'm going to do environmental affairs first. But kind of to what you're referring to, Craig, I think part of what I hear and how things that I think about too is oftentimes the public is aware of things going on in the community, in the city stuff before we're even aware. For instance, it's real interesting that we're looking at just barely looking at artificial turf and the cost and blah blah blah, but somehow it would be nice to kind of have a vision of the little things that are going on within the departments. I know our job is policy, but the public doesn't realize that, and they come to us with lots of little things. And I know we can come to you and to Laura and to Matt with whatever the questions are, but everybody doesn't get that unless we do council requests, which we sometimes do and sometimes we just talk to people. But everybody doesn't know what we get when I talk with Laura or with you, Chuck, or with Victoria. Everybody doesn't hear that. So, and I know when things are just in very basic discussions, it's hard to put that out because then the expectations may get beyond control.
I mean, in that example, I wouldn't even know whether we would even make a proposal to the council about it because we don't know the feasibility at this point. So right now it's just an operational proposal, something that we're looking at. It is in the scope of the operation. And we try to, I don't want to stifle anybody's creativity or ideas at the staff level. If we have things that are worth exploring, I want the staff to be able to do that. Whether or not they survive an actual proposal in the budget process, a lot depends on the numbers and the feasibility or whether there's outside funding to do it.
Well, I don't have a real solution for how we kind of stay informed, but it's at kind of the top of my interest too, is how to keep up with all the ideas that are going on and even our ideas, moving those into the mix and then seeing how and why those things play out or don't play out. So just chew on it and maybe somebody will come up with some more solid ideas. Laura, don't leave. I want to talk with you. So I want to mention environmental affairs and just let everybody know that, that's a very active group of people who have a lot of interest in especially environmental things for the, I guess that's why their name is Environmental Affairs. But I want to tell you a few of the things they're talking about. They're talking about recycling. And so I would suggest that they're part of the conversation when and invite it to our council meeting, our work session when we talk about recycling. They're still barely touching on PV solar. And they pretty much felt like the city is not ready to move towards anything dealing with that at the current time, but they touch on it as they get information. They're talking about recycling bin labels. They were aware that the city has some contamination in our recycling, and they wanted to do something that would help eliminate that contamination. Maybe that whole conversation is moot now, but they're talking.
No, I think it's still a valid conversation.
Okay. They talk about how can the public be more aware of what the EAC is doing. And they talk about Vigneto, which I think they pretty much have received the message that there's not much that the city of Sierra Vista has any interest in discussing Vigneto. As far as making any statements to them, I believe the mayor sent them a letter.
Yeah, public policy has been up to now is we don't interfere with other cities' issues. Unless they ask us to comment. So if they want us to have a resolution pro or against, I'm sure Mayor Benson will come knock on my door.
They talk about water management and essentially that's it. And they also look to field trips they can take to better understand conditions in the community. They're concerned about the state when they do local cleanup. When they clean up areas in the community that they used a contractor from outside of the city, and they wonder if, and that's not a formal proposal to us, but I'll ask them if they want to do that, if the state could use local people to do cleanup.
I think we encourage them to do that, but again, it's their decision.
Their land and their cleanup. That's EAC, so everybody kind of knows what they're talking about these days. The West End Commission, and I want to say just a little bit about this one. There's a group on the West End who are looking at doing a West End First Saturday, and they have a website called West End First Saturday on Facebook that you're encouraged to look at. And what they're encouraging businesses to do, and they're doing, people who have businesses on the West End are doing this. They are going business to business and asking folks if they would do something for First Saturday, have a art display or do a special or have just an open house of some sort. And their whole focus is, it was interesting to hear the two ladies who spoke about this. One was Ana Gonzalez and the other is Angel Gibson, that their premise is they don't need the city to take care of them. They would like to try and take care of their part of town or their business areas themselves. And I thought that was laudatory. And anyway, that's their one thing, the West End First Saturday. Another thing that's happening, and I need to ask the council if they're in support of a project that appears to be under the auspices of the West End Commission, but the project is called a Public Art Mural Project. Matt, you may be familiar with this, I'm not sure. What they're doing is asking businesses who want to use their private property space of their buildings for murals. And they have a group of artists who are interested in putting up murals. And I think we might indicate to some degree, although they didn't ask for our support, but I think the council should show whether we have support for that project or not.
Well, I think encouraging art in the West End is something I think we've stated in the old plan.
Strategic plan?
No, the West End development plan. I think that's something we've already stated, and I think this would be a good initiative to get the Arts and Humanities Commission to work with them as well. And there may be something we can do other than painting the water tower on what was the street?
Canyon Drive.
Canyon Drive. There are other opportunities down there, and I think it's a great program. Is there any objection to public art?
I think just doing a council vote of, not, you know what I mean, Mayor, not a vote of support, but we've done it for other organizations where we say, you know, there's not much the city's formally going to do, but by all means go forward and let us know if you need any help.
And I can certainly do a letter, just give them a letter of support if that's what they want.
I think that would be nice.
Okay.
They didn't ask for that, but I think it would be nice for us to do that. As far as the Arts and Humanities Arts and Humanities Commission is concerned, I didn't. I made a comment that I didn't think they needed permission from Arts and Humanities.
No, they don't.
For this particular project.
But the thing is, folks may want to work with them, or they may know of other funding sources and that kind of thing, which would help them out.
And that's what essentially the conversation was.
Yeah.
And the last one is Sister Cities, and we're still waiting. I don't have anything in particular to report from Sister Cities.
Okay, any other commission updates? Thank you very much. Future discussion items and council requests. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'd like to ask the council if they would be up for a future discussion on the feasibility of setting up essentially a crowdsourcing system in order to raise funds for public amenities, things that normally get cut from the budget, but the public has often asked for. I've been doing a lot of research since it was kind of brought up roughly 2-3 weeks ago, a month ago. For example, the city of New York, look, all of us are in the same boat, especially in Arizona with the public safety retirement system. This market volatility with the recycling is going to be there, but ultimately we have to be innovative and creative and find new ways to generate funds for things that normally are going to get cut as things like safety and road repairs and everything else takes priority. So what one city did was they stood up a crowdsourcing page. They use Kickstarter. You can go there. It says, here's the city of this, and these are the projects. And then it's a blend of projects that are submitted up through the local population that say, hey, here's a project. We want to do this. We'll act as the project managers, get this thing kind of going. They work in conjunction with the city government. It's all laid out within the normal rules of that page of the site itself. So all that goes through as normal. Plenty of people know how to do that. And then what happens is if enough people in the public put their money towards it, if it's not funded, no money gets taken out. If the money does all get funded, then the money goes to that project and off it goes. It gets built. So it's not hitting the general fund, it's not hitting Parks and Rec, it's not hitting community development, but it is a project that can be used to benefit the city. And again, there's cities all over the place that are resorting to this level of, I don't want to say resorting, they're adopting to and innovating to these levels because people are willing to put back into their community, but if it's not in the budget, there's nothing for it to do, it's never going to get going. So I request that the staff take a look at that with council's permission to find an alternative to some of the challenges that we're facing.
And I want to tell you, I think that was a good idea that you brought up a couple of weeks ago. One thing I asked the staff to do initially was to make sure we can do that in accordance with the procurement and acquisition laws. I don't see that's going to be a challenge, but I would agree with you that as soon as we can get this up, it's a great way to do what other cities are doing, to work on some of those projects that we obviously not going to be able to afford. So I think it's a good idea, Craig. Thanks. And I think we had a consensus last time to proceed on this. I don't think we had any objections. Do we have any objections?
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. All right. Anything else? All right. Seeing nothing else on the agenda, meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Oh,